And I have more back home that I could get you to. Back home. I'm all talking like I'm from Canada already. At least in my head. Oh, did you? I know whenever there's a camera, I'm like, gosh, I wonder what's going on in that side of the room today. And like everyone's just there. It's fine. It's cute. I can work with wherever you're at. Could you hear me slurp my coffee? That was gross. Could you hear me slurp my coffee? You did? Okay, I was like.
Sean probably a big brat. Being a little testy. Bestie Neon back there. I see.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Dragon Spirituality Summit, the third annual international now drag summit. But thank you all for being here this morning. I know it's early on a Saturday morning, so I'm glad that you all are here to get this day started. Hopefully you found snacks, coffee, that sort of thing. The restrooms, they're all gendered on this level. There's also some gendered ones on the lower level, as well as like a private one if you need to go use that. So feel free to make yourself comfortable while you're here. Yeah, so my name is Bonnie Violet, and I'm excited to be here as this being the third year. Every year we're in a new city, in a new place, and it's exciting to get to come to Toronto, in a completely different country than where we started back in Chicago and San Francisco. So, this is the plenary for community and individual spiritual trauma healing in a conservative state as a transgender spiritual drag artist and digital chaplain. I knew it was a mouthful, so I was like, I need to read that. There are a lot of directions that I think that we could go in this. I want to have more of a conversation, which might make it a mess for Sean. I'd love to like be able to interact with you all a little bit, and I think oftentimes for me, there's on any given topic, there's so many directions that you can go, and for me, at the end of the day, I want you all to leave feeling like you got a little something from our time here today. So I would really encourage that if you have any questions, if there's anything that I state that you just want to know more information, you can feel free to interrupt me or raise your hand and I'll call you as soon as possible. Or we'll also have some time afterwards either way. And we'll give you a mic. Yeah, we'll have somebody who will hand you the mic. And if you'll just introduce yourself, where you're from, if you're comfortable, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I think in order to really kind of get into this, I just need to introduce myself a little bit more. So I started to say, but my name is Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. So trans, genderqueer, I think you all know what that is, right? And then a spiritual drag artist. I identify as a spiritual drag artist because that's really kind of the only drag I do. I'm not like the typical, dancing at the club, getting her tips kind of girl. You give me a song to lip sync, even if it's my favorite, get in front of a group of people and just have fun. I'm not that girl. Like I love watching it happen, but for whatever reason, it scares the bejesus out of me. And I'm just unable to do it. Coming and talking to you in drag, I live for. Like I can do that for hours, but get me to lip sync to some song that I didn't even write, I can't do it. So a lot of the drag that I do as a spiritual drag artist, one, I think part of that is that like my lens and the thing that motivates me to do drag comes from a spiritual place. So it's not always overtly like spiritual to maybe the audience, but for me personally, it comes from that sort of place. Especially early on in drag, when I first started drag 7 years ago, I was not living as a trans person. I was a genderqueer person, sometimes identified it as a bearded lady, but that was in no way trans, at least at that time of life and my understanding. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and a friend of mine back home in Idaho had passed to suicide. And it was June 7 years ago, around July, it was early July, and he was this beautiful drag queen, like just beautiful drag queen. And I just always looked up to him, and there was a part of me that always wanted to do drag. I'd actually tried to do drag when I was like 20. Idaho was my first drag name. And I was living in Phoenix at the time, and I just had to get into drag for my job. In order to learn how to be gay, because I grew up in like a trailer in a town of 3,000 people in Idaho, in order to learn how to be gay, I got a job at a gay bar at 19 years old, 20 years old. And so as I was learning to be gay, they had us dress in the opposite sex for their anniversary. And I did that, and like I looked kind of like Jennifer Grey from Dirty Dancing before the nose job. So kind of. And when I did that, a lot of people, I got a cool response to it, but I didn't really know how to deal with it. Like they were hiring me to perform in clubs, and I gave it a shot. Back then, it was like Britney Spears was big, and Genie in the Bottle, Christina Aguilera, and I did like No Doubt, I'm Just a Girl, you know, that sort of stuff. But I had a really hard time because I was I was a cocktail server in the bar, and the guys would hit on me and be like, you know, like I was this cute thing or whatever, and then I would get in drag, and they would still hit on me and do that thing, and I'm like, wait, no, like this is not me, you know. I was like, I'm a dude who likes dudes. I'm not a dude who wants to be a girl, you know. Like that was my own internalized transphobia, and that's very harsh language. But at that time of my life, that's how I spoke, and that's how I saw myself. And so I couldn't quite get into drag and just put on an outfit and become a character. For whatever reason, I was still me underneath that, and I had a really hard time negotiating that. So I put drag away for like almost 20 years before I got back into drag again. And at that time, I did it after the death of my friend. I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol, so I have 16 years of recovery this year. And 7 years ago, I was part of a recovery community that would have, every month they would have a sober drag show. And so a lot of the sober queens would either drag artists would pick up their career after getting sober, or maybe they'd be starting something new. And so I started doing drag, and that's when I really started to lean into my transness. Even from the beginning, my performances were like about gender. You know, it was like the juxtaposition of like, I used to have like a big hairy chest and a big beard, and then I'd wear like lace, you know, and like just, you know, it was like this. I was messing with gender from the get. But what was really happening for me was I was wrestling with my own gender and my own understanding. And a lot of the times at the end of a drag event, most drag artists are like, I can't wait to get out of this stuff, like, you know, and I'm like, I don't want to get out of this. Like, I really like this. Can we go out on the town? Can I sleep in this? You know, yeah, not all of this, but you know, some of the other parts. And it just was like, I don't know, it felt so good. And it didn't feel good in the sense of like getting the, I think sometimes like you can think of drag artists and like this celebrity status or being known. Everybody loves a drag artist for the most part. And it wasn't that sort of attention that I liked. It was really more about what I felt about myself and the way that I was able to present myself. So in the beginning, a lot of my drag was very much about kind of living into kind of being more of a woman or being more trans femme, being more femme than it was about drag itself, I think. Now I feel like because I've transitioned, I can be a drag artist. And so it doesn't always have to be high femme or anything like that. That's just, I'm comfortable with there. So, but anyway, so that just gives you a little bit of the insight around like my drag. And so it's just always come from a place of like my spirituality, recovery, being sober. My sobriety is all based in spirituality. I grew up in that small town in Idaho of 3,000 people, and I was a trans queer kid, and my family did not know what to do with me. My dad was always correcting my gender and my expression, and I was a highly traumatized child because I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't know how to sit. I didn't know how to talk. I didn't know where to put my hands. I didn't know, like, it was just, I was a very nervous, anxious child, and I really learned to be as small as I could and try not to express myself too much. And so, I don't know where I was going with that. This will happen. She does this. So, yes.
No, I was helping your point.
Oh, I was like, question.
Family upbringing.
Yeah. So it was really hard to be at home, and then at school, it was really hard for me to be at school because I was still like that person. Plus, my dad was the drug dealer, and had a little bit of a, reputation, and we lived in a trailer house, and we didn't have nice clothes, and I wasn't Mormon, which was kind of a big deal where I grew up. If you weren't Mormon, you were kind of ostracized as well. And so I had all these like ticks against me. And so I really had a hard time at school as far as socially. I did really well as far as my grades and got honors and awards, that sort of thing. That was kind of how I I really hoped to get out of that trailer and out of that town by getting some sort of, good grades and all that sort of stuff. And then I ended up going to church when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And church is where I felt safe. Like, it was the place that I felt like I could just be. I was actually even kind of the cool kid, you know? And so that was really fun for me as well. So I really loved church all through, you know, grade school, into junior high, and even into high school. And when I graduated from high school, I'd moved out to Phoenix, Arizona to initially do architectural drafting. But then I did start school at Grand Canyon University, which is a Southern Baptist university, where I started to go to school I wanted to be a youth pastor. And I wanted to work with young people, obviously, but around theater and that sort of thing at the time. But my sexuality and all that was starting to really bloom. In my first year, or my first semester, I ended up dropping out because I was diagnosed with potentially I had leukemia. They thought I had leukemia. And so like I quit school, did all the things to get ready to deal with the fact that I had leukemia, went to the doctor, and then found out I didn't have leukemia, which was great. But then also like, you know, whatever. So, so after I kind of like, you know, got out of the church, because church was such a big deal for me and it was such a safe space, to automatically then see myself as a fag. I'm going to use that language because that's what it was for me. I started to not fit in church, and I could just be like, I could kind of explore this queerness, this gayness outside of church and maybe not bring it into church. But then at 20 years old, I was diagnosed with HIV. And that really kind of pushed me out of the closet in a lot of ways, because I was like, oh shoot, I'm gonna die. And it was a very scary thing for me because I didn't know a lot about it. It was 1999, so it wasn't the 80s, but my education and understanding was the 80s. And so it was a very traumatic experience for me and for my family. And that's when drugs and alcohol came into my life. I really feel like they gave me life. I think I'm grateful for drugs and alcohol during that time, because I think they kept me alive. And the great thing that they did was they connected me to queer folks, and queer folks who loved who they were and lived how they were. And like, I learned how to love myself as a queer person with those individuals. Unfortunately, I did end up getting a drug problem, but you know, in time, a lot of things aren't so good for you. I've come to find out things that were once good for you may not be good for you at some point in time. And so with drugs and alcohol, that was for me the case as well. And so just to kind of move into the topic a little bit more, and again, feel free to ask questions, whatever. I tend to just speak from the heart. I try to get channeled and shit. I'm not quite that ooh, but kind of. And just try to trust that I'm gonna go in the direction it needs to be gone. So a lot of the work that I do now is really centered around, I believe that spiritual trauma is a huge public health concern for LGBTQ folks. And more importantly, trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary folks. I think there's a lot more acceptance around being gay and lesbian, not saying it's great, but it's a little more so. There's a little bit more acceptance. People in churches have even been saying doing gay marriages and kind of being somewhat affirming, but the transness is still, and non-binary is something I think the church is still really wrestling with, as well as the rest of the world. And so because I believe that spiritual trauma is a huge public health concern for me and my community, I feel like there's ways that we need to address that. And so all the work that I do is really kind of around combating that. And so for one is I live my life as a out spiritual person. I don't necessarily, like, I do preach, but not like in my everyday life, you know, like I'm not attached to any dogma or religion. That's why I coined myself as a chaplain, digital chaplain mostly, and queer one, because I'm a chaplain of another sort. And I really feel called to be with people around death and death to self, especially in the form of identity. So oftentimes we will begin to see ourselves as somebody that we didn't see ourselves as before, and somehow that becomes incongruent with, say, our say God or our religion or spirituality. And so really helping people see that their spirituality is in play already and really bring an awareness to what is it that we do to give ourselves life so that we can live. You know, to me, spirituality, spirit is what animates us. It's what causes us to move out in the world in the way that we do. And so for me, spirituality is about having awareness of that and then working to inspire and cultivate and push that spirit in a direction that is going to be most useful to myself and the people around me. So, and because it is so stigmatized and traumatizing as far as religion and stuff, you can't just go, like, you can, like, we do these dragon spirituality events. I've been doing them for years. And like, I could be walking down the Castro and like, yay, gay, you know, hood, you know, and I'm like, hey, there's going to be a drag show. You want to go? In spirituality. And they're like, they like drop the flyer or they like, you know, look away. And that's real. I was that girl for a long time that if you started to bring up God in me or godly people wanted to work with me, I was like, no. Like, I ran an AIDS organization that I started in my 20s. And during that time, I was very much like, you fuckers, stay away from us. You've hurt us enough, don't hurt us anymore. You know, and so I know what it's like to be on that end, but I also wished that somebody could have told me sooner that it could be different and that not every, you know what I mean? Like, not everyone has to be that way and that you can come to see your own. I don't know, the reality is that I became detached from the awareness of God and spirituality, but that didn't mean that like God wasn't at play or that I wasn't even living into what I believed God had intended for me all along. And so, but it can take a process. So like, I think a big part of healing around spiritual trauma as an individual is to be able to come to an understanding of where you are now. What is it that you believe? What is it that you know? What is it that you hope for? And if those things, if you knew that those things were true, always, because you're kind of, yeah, you do believe that, what would it look like if you applied those beliefs and understandings now to say when you were 20 or when you were going through that hard time and you thought you couldn't find God or see God or any of those sorts of things? If you could see from the lens now there, does it change? Can you begin to see that God was there or people were there or this thing I didn't understand was still true at that point in time? And I think we can begin to change our narratives. We don't get to like undo it, but we do get to come to know it more fully. And I think in being able to come to know it more fully, we then get to heal from it. And so we begin to change our narrative so that we're not talking from, for me, from like a victim standpoint, and really be coming to a space of resilience and being reminded of my resilience. And then through that process, it builds our faith. And I think it also gives us hope because I know that there's still parts of me who struggle to really trust God or like even know what that is or, you know, all that sort of stuff. But I still have hope that it's there and that maybe one day I'll understand. And even just knowing that is helpful and useful. So one of the other things that we have to combat when we're thinking about community level is the fact that there is so much religious trauma. You know, and even if you are not a religious person and you didn't grow up in a religious home, most likely you live in a country that there are laws and policies and powers that have impacted you and the way that you live your life in a very severe way. I think especially as queer people, as women, you know, there are certain laws and things that are impacted that are driven by the idea of religion that have created some sort of trauma within us. And so at a community level, I think we have to work to help people see that there are opportunities to be in community within your religion of origin or maybe a new religion or a new spiritual space in order to, that will really not only, that you can bring your full self into. And it's not even just that, oh, you're the trans person in the seat, but more of like you are a trans person, but you're actually preaching and like you're celebrated. It's not just like you're here, we love you, but you can't be in leadership. We don't really care too much about what you think, really. But we'll give you a hug and we'll be so glad you're here. But you know, that that's patronizing, to say the least. So, but there are communities of faith in all religions that do know how to hold us and know how to hold us well. And so I think a big part of the work that I do as well is a lot of community first events in which I invite communities of faith to participate in the process of doing something for the LGBTQ community. So one of those postcards that I passed out, it says, "Drag is not a crime." And if you didn't get one, I have some here. And so basically this last June, I created so in Idaho, they tried to make drag illegal a couple years ago. And so I decided to put together a Drag is Not a Crime fashion show. And basically the goal of this fashion show was to obviously state, oh, and just as a little trivia thing, this doll on the front here was designed by Sequin McQueen, who was one of our performers last year at Dragon Spirituality Summit. She's out of Portland, Oregon, but yeah, just a little history there. So basically what we did was we had each drag artist, we had 12 drag artists who each picked a different cause or issue, and they created a look that was specific to that issue. And then we ran them all in a runway, one right after the other. And then what we also did, though, is we got what were called like VIP allies. And so I also got people in the community who were, say, like the trans doctor that maybe nobody really knew too much about, or the pastor that does trans stuff, or it was just like a lot of just random kind of people that could connect trans, gender nonconforming, drag folks to different resources. And so again, it was just another way to try to highlight all of this. And it was completely funded by communities of faith. So it was all ages, which is very rare for drag to be in Idaho, for one. We had it in it was a bar, but it was a space that could have all ages. And we had over 300 people come. We had 400 people registered, and because there was such a long line, people didn't stay. But we had probably 350 or so people who came out to a drag fashion show. And again, it was all ages, and it was a lot of folks from from church. And so it ended up being a really rad time, and we're looking to do it on an annual basis. I think this year we're going to focus on actually having more visibility around transness and gender nonconformingness and genderqueer. We'll probably have a fashion show that's specifically for those individuals. We'll still have that drag element, but drag overall is starting to become a lot more accepted in some places and in some venues. Like there's still issues around kids and young people, and depending on where you are in the state as well is a whole nother thing. And Callie G is doing a workshop this afternoon where she'll be talking all about that, being in Pocatello, Idaho, if you're curious about learning a little bit more about that. So those are the kind of events in which I can get religious community to support what we're doing. They're on paper and everything. They're on paper not because they need to be because they want to be like the sponsor and be seen, but they're there so they can be seen from LGBTQ folks that they are an affirming organization. And it's just it may look the same, but the motivation is different. There's plenty of people who like to put their name on shit, but this isn't about putting your name on it to put your name on it, as far as like some sort of performance. But it's really about, no, we're doing it and we're showing up, and we're gonna receive you when it's that time. And so that's, I think, as far as the community level, is really trying to address that. The second thing that I did, we had Idaho's first ever trans march this last September, which was awesome. And it wasn't a political march. I mean, it's politically just because we're in public, but it wasn't centered around politics. It was really about being able to express joy. So it was a joy march. And so we had over 1,300 people show up for that march the first year, which was insane. When we were organizing it, I was like, we're gonna have 1,000 people. I wanna have 1,000 people. And we're like, the permit's only for 999. Okay, I wanna have 999 people. And my team were like, oh, maybe like 5 or 8, maybe 5, maybe 800. I'm like, if we don't have that many, I'm gonna be disappointed. And I'm like, I'm not going to be mad at you and think you did a horrible job, but I think it's really important for us to have a huge presence because there's going to be so many people who aren't going to go that day because they're scared or they have to work or whatever. And I want people to see that there is a big bunch of people who love trans and gender nonconforming people in Idaho specifically. And so I think the other part of that was not just doing like a joy march. And that for me, that was really about, I believe joy is an important practice to find ways to express joy. Joy is a very, I think it's one of the most vulnerable emotions, and it comes from within. Like, you know, it's like that old Bible, that old like Sunday school story. The guy got the joy down in my heart. You know, where? Yeah, over there. And I truly believe that, but I've been somebody who's honestly had a really hard time letting myself experience joy, especially as I've gotten older and especially in a lot of different environments. And some of us have gotten good about having and expressing joy when, say, we're at a drag show or we're with our family in our home or we're with our chosen people. But to be full of joy in public is something we all should have the ability to do, but it does take a certain container in order for us to be vulnerable in those ways. And so that was really, and I think it's important for us to make space like that, not to, because I think people can talk about like spiritual bypassing or just like, la, 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 you know, like, everything's okay. Meanwhile, you know, all this violence and everything's happening, right? So it's not in a sense of like trying to avoid or escape the struggle, but actually to help us combat and overcome that struggle. So one of the things that happened for me is like, the reason why I was so passionate about this walk, for one, I needed it for me. I just moved back to Idaho like the year before, and as a trans person, I was petrified. I would go 9 days, 10 days in a row and not leave my house to even like take out the trash or check the mail. Like I was living a very isolated life because I was very scared of the world, and I didn't think there was anyone out there who really was there for me. At the grocery store or when I go for a walk or any of those sorts of things. And so I needed to see it too. And the cool thing is all I had to do was say, hey, let's do this. And everybody just jumped in. Like the community was thirsty for it. Trans and gender nonconforming people were ready. And there were so many people who love us who were also ready and they were excited to have an opportunity to make a proclamation that they are here for us. And so, one of the byproducts of it, and I think part of it is the planning, the programming. So I was really intentional. So basically we had, I wanted to get this statue made. So we got this welded metal statue made. We happened to connect with the burners, you know, like from Burning Man, but a local group. And so they built this it was just gonna be this cute little thing. And then it ended up being this cute little thing. It was kind of like a tornado shaped because I wanted to get flowers so what happened is once people marched to the Anne Frank Memorial, they all received a flower once they gathered there. Folks who couldn't walk or didn't want to walk or just wanted to be a part but couldn't be a part of the march, they could meet us there as well. So we had 1,300 people. They all had flowers, and on the flowers they wrote messages to other trans and non-binary people in Idaho specifically. And then we carried all of those flowers. And so for folks who couldn't carry them, we carried them for them. And we carried the 1,300 flowers back to Boise Pride, which was the main Pride Festival. Because we also wanted to do it as part of the main Pride Festival because there's a lot of work within our LGBTQ community around really embracing and understanding transness and non-binariness and all the gender difference outside of, you know, being gay, just gay or lesbian. And so, where I was going with that. And so with these flowers, then we took them back to Boise Pride, and then we had the statue, and everyone basically attached their flower to the statue. So then we had 1,300 flowers attached to this welded statue. It was called the Storm of Flowers. And so the festival happened for the next 3 days. And so people could come to our booth, and if you're trans or non-binary or gender diverse, then you would receive a flower from the statue. And so all weekend long, we kept giving people flowers that were written on by people who got to do the march. And so it was really awesome to get to hand people those flowers. It was really wild too, because you never do this, but like, are you trans or non-binary? And they're like, you know, it's like, it's weird. I was like, I'm not trying to clock you, but if you are, then, you know, that it was kind of interesting too, because you'd have like maybe a whole group of people and one person was trans or non-binary, and you'd be like, oh, I got something for you. And we just were giving them to trans, non-binary, intersex, demi-girls, demi-boys, anyone who didn't identify as cisgender. It was for them. And so it was really cool. We saw lots of tears, lots of happiness. We even had one person, they were walking around the booth a little bit. So we did have some additional flowers that were at our booth that people could write on as they visited. And this younger person came by and they were, I'm just checking the time. And they were like kind of walking around a little bit and they were trying to figure out what to write on their card. And they like kind of called me over. I'm like, yeah, hey. And they're like, can I write, don't do it? I was like, yes, of course. Like, he's like, they're like, it's kind of dark. And I was like, if you feel like you want to write that, you need to write it. Because you don't know who's going to get that flower. And it might be exactly what they need to hear. If you're thinking you need to say it, just say it, you know? And so it was a very range of things that were written on the flowers, and I think why people were writing what they were writing. And then what we did was this Sunday, we have a multi-faith pride service where we attempt to have a diverse group of communities of faith to come and do like a service before the big parade and all that sort of stuff. And so we did it for our second year. And what we did was we had an additional 250 flowers at this event, and everyone who came to that service, spiritual service, wrote something on those flowers, and then we replenished the statue so that we then could give the flowers to people as they come in. And so some of them might have had more of a spiritual lens and spiritual wording, and who knows if that was helpful for the person who received the flower on the other end. So those are kind of, I think, and to me, that's spiritual as fuck, right? And it's really around kind of addressing healing and trauma and building resilience and reminding people that they're not alone, that there are powers and energies that are here with them, which for me is very spiritual, but that's not, like, we didn't call it a spiritual thing. And I think that's some things that we just have to be willing to do. You know, it's like to leave Jesus at the door, even if it was Jesus who got us there, and maybe even Jesus who walks us through that. I'm not a Jesus girl, but you get what I'm saying. Jesus is a big instrument of trauma for a lot of people. And so that's why I used Jesus in that language. But again, I'm not an anti-Jesus person either. So, but I know you all get it. Any questions? Yes. Sorry, I should have gave you a little bit of a warning. Wow. I think it was on.
Okay, we need a professional mic holder.
I'm at the age now where I don't get technology.
It's okay. We're all in this together. Oh.
Hello. Oh, there.
There we go.
So the question is.
And what was your name? Where are you from?
Oh, sorry, Chris from Vancouver. Okay. I helped organize the drag Easter service that was out there that made the news, and one of the things that was the most difficult for me was, you know, sifting through the social media, the emails, the voicemails, the vitriol, and there was a moment actually where I folded.
Yeah.
For quite a while, and so I'm wondering what you do to not fold. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure all of you are aware of, if you do any sort of LGBTQ work, or even just being an LGBTQ person on social media, you deal with a lot of hate, you deal with a lot of like horrible comments and language constantly. I think partly, unfortunately for me, I think I've been dealing with it for so long that I've gotten to a place where I can not take it personal most of the time or much of the time. For me personally, I do what I can to try to erase it immediately because I don't want other people to come and read it and be traumatized or bothered in the same way that I was. I usually delete, block, you know, and then I'll report if it's like, if they're saying like you need to die or I'm going to hurt you or, you know, any of those sorts of things, I will report them regardless of what thing I'm on. And I think the big thing is try not to hold it for yourself. As far as like, hopefully you're sharing that experience maybe with other people in your community that can hold you and hold it, and you guys can hold one another because it does get on you and it sticks in you. And so I think we have to find ways to really support one another through that. There's sometimes I just have to shut off. I don't do political stuff anymore directly because it just hurts too much for me personally. I love that there are people in our community who can, and I support them and love them for that, but that's just not a space for me. So I think the biggest thing for me is, and I was a lot more willing at one point in time to put myself in those ways, and I've really just had to come to find out what feels best for me. Now, discomfort, challenge, like that's part of any good, I think, growth and good thing to do. But if it's like hurting you in a way that's really causing delays and harm in your life, then I would really consider maybe finding somebody else who can do that part. It might even be a greater thing for allies to do because they're not impacted by it in the same way that, say, we are in hearing some of those messages. And so I think the big thing is don't be afraid to turn it off. Don't be afraid to turn off comments if you need to. I personally don't do that because I think there are some good stuff that come on and I like to leave those, but it was wild when we did, and I think sometimes the comments come more when I do advertising. Like, so especially I don't think they do as much rage baiting as they used to do on some of the social media, or maybe things have just developed in my algorithm or something, but I don't get it in the same way that I used to when I would pay for like Facebook ads or Instagram ads or that sort of thing. It seemed like they were always putting me in front of the people I didn't want to see it. So it's very real challenge. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges because it not only infects you like when you're in that room or like in that comments, but it actually, like for me, I took it out in the world. Like it kept me from being out in the world because I started to see that the whole world was like that, which is not true. There are so many people for us than against us. But when we get in those little areas, it doesn't feel that way, it doesn't sound that way, it doesn't look that way. And there's even a larger, even a larger amount of people who just don't care. Or they're not bothered by it, you know, not in a way that they're like, I don't care, but more of like, they're not putting that much time or energy one way or the other into it. And that's really most people. But we don't get to interact with those people often, especially when we're in social media, or even when we're out in the public, depending on what events that we're doing. So we are sometimes mindful of timing. Safety is a big concern. So there's been some events like our drag event that was all ages. We didn't advertise it until like about a month before, and it was just within our own circles. When we did the march, the reason why I did it during Pride Fest is because there's already a big group of queers coming into one space, so we'd have the volume and the support of that. And because I wanted to do it during Trans Day of Visibility, and then I was like, no, that we're going to be too by ourselves. We need to be with a group of people. And then for that, we actually started broadcasting from the get. But we also had the support of the festival. We actually had people come to us from national, regional, and local places that were keeping an eye on security for us. And we were doing like cybersecurity and like all kind. It was like wild how people could look out. So those are things to be important. They're really, I think sometimes, like I know for me, sometimes I'll be like, why is this bothering me? Like, why do I care? Like I've heard this so many times, and it just does. And I think so. The big thing is just to be honest with yourself. That if you're having a really hard time with it, to find some space and or some support through it. It's kind of a long answer, but is that helpful?
Yeah, and I think like the allies piece, get the allies to
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And it's probably a great experience for an ally in some ways too, to really come to understand what a little more closely what it might be like to even just see that there's those kinds of things being said to someone on a fairly regular basis. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Disco? Or either, I'm like, fight.
Thank you. Disco Jesus Windsor from Windsor, Ontario. Thank you again for this wonderful talk, Bonnie. You mentioned the statue project. Do you feel connected to this project? As I've even been changing my vernacular, instead of saying history or herstory, I've been saying legacy in honor of the show Legendary. Is this your legacy project? Is this your what you want to go down in, like, you're long gone, 100 years from now, it's still being practiced, or do you want to see it expand to every city, every town, every part of the states or beyond in the world? Do you want this to be something that
I think a lot of what happens now is kind of, I don't want to say none of my business, but I have no idea what is going to come with anything that we do. And I feel like all I have to do is do my best to create something with intentionality. And yes, I did think that we would have then a statue that then is going to be placed in public and, like it's going to continue on. But whether it's attached to me or not is something that I struggle with, to be honest with you. I think as a religious, spiritual person, I've always been about like saving the world and, this sort of stuff, And there's a big part of me that's still that way. And as I get older, it does feel like I don't want to just die and there be nothing of me when I leave. But I wouldn't say that's why I've done this stuff. But I do think about the longer game. Like what happens after this event? Or what can we do at this event that can keep going? So that statue is one of those things. We are now actually building a temple of remembrance. So we're building a temple like they do out at Burning Man for Trans Day of Remembrance. And so for the week of Trans Day of Visibility, people will be able to come to the temple and engage with the temple. We have butterflies that people can purchase, write messages on. They can engage with name. We'll have people's names. But people will be able to come and be with the temple. And then we'll also have organizations that can provide resources and connection be there as well. So if people are coming to, so if you're trans, you could maybe come and meet with the Trans Homing Center, or maybe you could get like gender affirming clothing, that sort of thing. And then on Trans Day of Remembrance, we're gonna burn the temple, and we're gonna have like fire dancers, and it's very ritualistic, right? And we have some of the flowers left over from the Joy March, and those are going to be in the temple, and we're going to burn them too. And so, again, it is kind of thinking that intentionality from one thing to the next. And we're partnering with the Burner Alliance. Like maybe that seems weird as like a partner. It's not one that I would have thought, hey, let's go, but it makes a lot of sense. And so I think that's part of it too, is really thinking how you can collaborate with people in the community to create something you might not have ever thought of before that actually might even seem more in alignment. Like we're building this temple and doing all this spiritual shit, but for a lot of people, it's not going to be that. They're just going to come do a thing. You know what I mean? And that's great and okay. Was there a question or comment?
Thank you.
Oh, here first, yeah. And then we'll go to Whoopsie. So we'll do here, and then we'll go to Whoopsie.
My name is Arsena, and I'm from Vancouver.
Yeah.
You were touching based on how, like, in certain religious places, like you talked about how being trans and being gay, in those spaces, you technically don't get a chance to work with people in the church, like being able to be a member. Mm-hmm. I found that kind of odd in one of the churches I used to go to a lot that I considered like a family. So I was wondering, how did you deal with like most of the persecution from those churches? Because some of those churches were the ones that actually made me almost feel like I wanted to walk away from God.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the big thing for me was, in some ways, I want to say like, it's not the best, like I made my own religion. Not in the sense like I made a religion, but I came to see my own spirituality, my own understanding of God. Like what was it that was keeping me alive to begin with, and what was causing me, so I was able to come and identify my own understanding and beliefs, and then I just found myself in other settings in which that was in alignment. And at first I had to protect myself and stay away from anyone or anything that made me feel not good. And then now I can get to a place where I can go somewhere and they can be however they're going to be. And I can tell them if I want that that's not cute, or I can just go on my way and have the experience that I need to have, because connecting in community in a spiritual way is really important to me, and it's something that I really struggle to find as a trans queer person in Idaho. There's not a lot of settings where I can go and be intentionally spiritual with a group of people that is in a way in alignment with, say, all of my beliefs or most of my beliefs. And so sometimes you just have to figure out, like, it's so weird. Like, I'll listen to hymns sometimes, which sounds really weird, but there's some nostalgia and that magic that I once saw God to be when I was a kid that I can tap into now. So I guess that's kind of what came up for me. Whoopsie. How are we on time, Sean?
We are at 10:26, so you're good.
I'm good?
We've got
20
20 minutes.
minutes?
That's including the spiritual.
Okay. Okay. Really? Damn, this is nice. We got plenty of time. Yes, whoopsie.
Hi, Lauren, Whoopsie Daisy, Vancouver, BC. Not really a question, just some comments, and much gratitude for sharing your story and for all the beautiful ways you're a vessel of healing for yourself and for many, many others that you may not even know. And I had a couple things come to me while you were speaking that I thought I really wanted to share. One was, I was especially struck by the person who was circling and debating whether to write "Don't Do It" on the flower. And what occurred to me was, our population of trans and genderqueer and non-binary people have an especially high rate of unaliving themselves. And I just thought, I wonder if the person who received that flower was a person who was struggling and was thinking about unaliving themselves that day or that week, and received a flower that said, "Don't do it." And it just struck me how beautiful a gift that would have been for the person who offered it and the person who received it. And that's what really struck me about the "Don't Do It" was a lot of our people don't make it and don't get to be their fabulous, full, holy, beautiful, beloved selves. And I just thought, oh, that "Don't Do It" could have been so powerful and a lifesaver for somebody. And the other thing I thought was the image of fire. It makes so much sense to me to burn stuff down and rebuild, or to refine, to burn off what doesn't work, and to refine and make beautiful and sparkling and gorgeous something new that is left. And I just think the imagery of fire works so perfectly in a spiritual way. And I think there's many layers to what you're doing that are fabulous. Well done.
Awesome.
Bless you.
Thank
Bless
you so
you.
much. I appreciate that. And just to speak a little bit more on the "Don't Do It" part, I think the other aspect that the writing the message got to do, I know for me, getting to write down my own thoughts and what's going on in my head really helps me to write them down, and they become less powerful. And I wonder if they needed to write that so they could hear that for themselves. I hadn't thought about it at the moment, but a part of me was like, I should go check on them, because in the moment I didn't think about it, but there was a thought afterwards, like, oh, I wonder how they are now, And I hadn't really thought about it till you were sharing, but maybe all they needed to do was have an opportunity to write it down. And that might have been enough even for them. And again, I don't know their experience. I don't know where they're at or what that was coming from. But those were some thoughts that kind of had come to my mind in that moment too. And we have a question up here.
Thanks. My name's Michelle. I'm also from Vancouver. I'm an ally. And I wonder if you could speak a bit more to your experience of bringing together multi-faith communities.
Yeah. So yeah, bringing together multi-faith communities. It's been a journey. I think getting to live in Chicago for a little while and in San Francisco, I was able to interact with more diverse groups of communities of faith that have been wrestling with us in the greatest ways a little bit longer. So I think that was really helpful for me. But being back in Idaho and trying to weave, that has been really challenging. It's all very, even like this summit, which we sometimes challenge with, it's always mostly Christian people or Christian damaged people or, whatever. Like Christians have a really huge role in that. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of work that Christians need to do to make up for it, right? Amen. And that need to repair and fix is still not the priority when there are other people in the room. So I think there was recently we did the multi-faith service for the second time. Last year we did it and came on late and had a lot to say about how it was arranged and was put together. It was actually a Unitarian pastor who put together the program, but it was already kind of preset, and it was set up in some I think Catholic sort of format or whatever. And they'd eventually, they asked me to speak on lament, and I was like, I don't want to speak, I don't want to, you know what I mean? And so I think so it was all very, it was, I guess the thing that I wanted to say with that, I mean, it takes time and it takes energy, it's relationship building. But I think, there has to be, one of the things that's challenging too is that the community is going to see it differently. We had a synagogue who gave us money for the Drag and Spirituality Summit. Now, with everything happening in Palestine, that created a huge challenge for a lot of our drag artists. And they were willing to step out because of how they felt. And I could understand that. And then also the rabbi who was at this synagogue had also been arrested a number of times for LGBTQ rights. And there was an element of having to trust that this man is supportive of me and my community and probably understands what's happening in a lot better and different way, a nuanced way than I do. And obviously he wasn't he wasn't anti, you know what I mean? He was very, I always get nervous talking about it because I don't know what I'm talking about in a lot of ways, especially as far as saying it out loud. But I had to be willing to make space for him, as well as make space for their discomfort and to be able to sit through that. And everybody was able to move forward and was comfortable with it, but we kind of had to take some time through that, and we've had to have some difficult conversations. And at one point I had to be like, no, I trust this guy. I get what you're saying, and if you need to bow out, bow out. But I really believe that they're really with us, And I think sometimes we have to be willing to let people who aren't quite right yet, if that's how we're perceiving them, to still show up for us, to make mistakes, to get better. But we can do that, but the people with us may not. And so I think those are the things that we get to do in private, we get to do in smaller groups, and we don't subject our congregations or our larger group of people to that sort of ignorance. I want to say ignorance, just not knowing any different. Well-intended folks, but they just don't know how harmful they can be. And so we can work with folks that way. So I really feel like I'm just getting started with it in a lot of ways, at least locally. And I think the biggest thing is really trying to center non-Christians, people within the space. So if there is, we were able to bring in a two-spirit person this year, which was fantastic. And it's so hard to, without tokenizing or exploiting or, all these sorts of things. And it's just so not good in so many ways still. And I can't keep that from me not doing something. And then to just kind of be able to be more intentional and try to do better next time. And that's what we've been trying to do. And this year we're not doing a Christian setup. We're going to try to just break it up. We went to a two-spirit person. We're say, hey, Manny, what would you like to do here? How would you like to express yourself? And then make room for that. We did say if you could, but we're not expecting you. If you could keep it to 5 minutes, that'd be great. Just because it's a 45-minute thing and we're trying to have, you know what I mean, some other things. But even at that, I said, we're willing to give you more time if you want. Just let us know what you need, you know? So, which I think can sometimes feel a little, I don't want to barter with people, that sort of thing, but sometimes we still have to think about the bigger picture too. And so really just being willing to kind of be intentional with that and to move through it. I don't know what other way to say or do it, but just like to do the work. And I think especially if you're a leader in community, whether you're a religious leader or you're just a trans activist or queer activist, like you have to be kind of, I think that's what we take on, is to kind of put ourselves in spaces where we can begin to do that work. And the rest of the people in our community are not going to understand it. Like I think sometimes people think, oh, like she's just trying to make everybody happy, and you know what I mean? Or like, you know what I mean? Like not willing to stand up for certain things. And you have to be willing to kind of trust yourself in that nuance, while other people are not gonna, a lot of people are gonna have an opinion on what you're doing, probably on all sides, right? And so I think you just have to stay, for me, I just try to stay centered and connected to my higher power and the people who remind me of it, and try to move forward as best I can. And whenever I notice I'm not right, work on it, I guess. Okay? Yes. I don't know if that was really helpful, but okay.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm just gonna stand over here. I wanted to say, I'm Andrew, by the way. I actually work here at Emmanuel College, and I just have really been touched by your sharing today, and like as somebody of a similar vintage and queer, sharing the experience of somebody growing up in the church and you know all that. But anyway, I also just wanted to say I'm not sure if anybody has actually ever, like there's so much overlap with what's happening this weekend to what actually happens in this space at Emmanuel College. And I'm not sure if anybody's actually shared what we do at Emmanuel College. And so just quickly, I wanted to let you know that Emmanuel College is rooted in the United Church of Canada, which is a progressive Christian denomination, and in the States we're in full alignment with the United Church of Christ. And I was really struck when you identified as a chaplain, because that's really what people are trained. Most of our students here are training to be chaplains or spiritual care providers or spiritual care workers. And the United Church is a long standing social justice church, and we've got long history in LGBT affirmation and all this aligning work. Sorry, I'm like I don't mean to hijack this at all. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to say there's so much going on here that's similar, and lots of queer folks. Jules is our chair of our Emmanuel College Student Society, so there's lots of overlap here. So if anybody wants to learn how to even be doing this kind of work, sort of formally or informally, it happens here. And so yeah, thanks. Sorry, I felt like I'd be remiss to miss the opportunity to share what we do here.
I appreciate you doing that.
Oh, and also we're multi-faith. We have Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, spiritual, non-religious. We got lots of people trying to do the work of spiritual care together. Anyway, thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Other question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Yunju, and I'm sorry I came later because I missed my bus. I should have left home at 6:40, but it was a little bit later, so I came later. Sorry about that. And I am also studying at Emmanuel. I just started my first year here in the fall, and I have been working with some LGBTQ folks, and one of my friends who's lesbian, and she came from Korea and South Korea, and as excuse me, first generation immigrants, she found it's kind of challenging for her to be part of the queer group because of her cultural background or language differences. So she's even so that intersectionality is burdening her in a way that other people who wouldn't have that background is experiencing. So do you have any experiences related to that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, like in my area, in some ways, like I hold, like I think that intersectionality is something that we all have to be really mindful of. You know, unfortunately, it's like even like for me, like I'm white, you know, I'm Mexican, but I'm white, and and so like, and I'm a trans person, and so like me getting into being seen as like I don't know, it's like I think we got to be better at it, and sometimes there's just I think it's important for us to be aware that just because we're lesbian, that all lesbians in the room are going to get along or that they're going to be able to connect. And you might not connect because of language, because of how you see yourself in the world. I mean, there's so much diversity within ourselves, which I think is like obvious, but there's not enough space for that difference. And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up kind of in what Andrew was saying as well too, is like, it's important for me as a spiritual person, much of my life, I sought sameness. And I think that's still what a lot of people do in spiritual settings. They're like, oh, we all believe that love is like the universal thing. I think what we need to really do is create space to celebrate our difference and express our difference and to be in our difference. And that is a privilege to get to do that. But like, I have learned so much from people different than myself than I could ever learn from the people like me in the room. Even though that might be where I feel the most comfortable. And I think the thing that's important too, it's like, I was like this girl who moved from Idaho to Chicago, and I was like, oh yay, there's like black and brown people and all these different sorts of races that I hadn't been around my whole life, and I wanted to, and they're like, girl, we don't want you here. You know, so I think it's also being mindful of what is it that you bring to the room, and are you actually being harmful to the space, or are you being helpful to the space? And so I'm really trying to be intentional about what space I'm in, and I usually wait for an invitation before I go into spaces that I feel like I might be different in. And I know this doesn't directly respond to your comment or your question. I think unfortunately, there are multi-marginalizations that someone that could be experiencing that's going to take you even further away from the core. Or I don't want to say the core, but the larger group of people, I guess. And so I think that's when it becomes really challenging for folks. And I don't know what the solution is. But I think those individuals have gotten probably better about being able to be in a room different than themselves, like with people different from themselves, and still hopefully be able to gain something from that experience. But yeah, I mean, it really is, there's really so much privilege within a lot of the different intersections that it's just something that I can't ever fully understand, but I know it. I know that it's there. I just don't, and I'm not always the person who can address it. I think that's important as well to kind of recognize. So we don't have a lot of diversity in Idaho. So yes, we did this Trans Joy Boise event and it was fantastic, but it was very white. So, and it wasn't because black and brown folks weren't invited or even part of the planning, but we haven't done the work to make it a better place already, so that individuals can get in there. So I think there's a lot I still have to learn there, and a lot that, yeah, that there's just so much more there. And for me, it's just been trying to find my place in what makes the best sense for me. Because also say like, and this might sound weird, but I think like if like, I guess, I don't know, I guess there's a part of me that feels like I can still be a great leader, even with the inability to connect in those ways until we can get to that space. So I hope that my legacy is that I can be a part of hopefully, you know, allowing to create spaces in which more people can have a better experience with life and whatever that is that's happening. So, and I'm still kind of learning what that is. And for me, I think my spirituality is really what grounds me and will cause me to go through that in a way that's authentic and not like a spiritual bypass that I think a lot of folks, or a lot of people, depending on where they're at in their understanding, they kind of do a spiritual bypass. And that's not what I'm saying. Other questions or comments? It's good to see you, Susan. Love you. No? One of the things that I wanted to just let you know about, if you're curious to know a little bit more about some of the work that I've done, the Dragon Spirituality Summit was actually a spinoff from the Dragon Spirituality podcast and YouTube talk show. So we have a separate YouTube or wherever you listen to podcast, and I've interviewed 60 drag artists around the US and Canada about their spirituality and how it relates to their drag. And so for some folks, it's very, they identify with their drag and spirituality, and for others, it's something they're still figuring it out. And so my interview process is to help folks lace their drag narrative with a spiritual thread. And my hope is that the drag artists will feel more integrated, that other drag artists can see that there's spirituality, or there could be spirituality in their drag if they wanted. And then the other aspect is for people who are not a part of us to see that there is more to us than what they've maybe been told on the news or seen at a drag show, which is all great, but there is more to us. And then my aunt is a conservative Christian. She lives in Maricopa, Arizona, which is one of the most conservative places in the States. And she is my biggest supporter in my transness. She's the only person in my family who consistently calls me Bonnie Violet and uses she, her pronouns. We have a podcast called Splintered Grace, where we talk about how we got there, because we went 20 years estranged because of my queerness. And again, now she was like there when I was like crying about the fact I had to wait for my estrogen 2 days, and she even to the point where there was a comment on a YouTube comment and it said, "Oh, he's hideous." And she goes, "But you're not a guy." She's like, "But you're not a man. Like, why would they?" You know what I mean? So she's really come to see me as who I am and how I see me. And she's doing it as a conservative Christian who's very strong in her beliefs. And I believe that her understanding of being a conservative Christian is her loving and supporting me as I am. She believes that I'm a child of God, her God, and that I'm here doing what God would have me do, what her God would have me do. And that I'm uniquely suited for the people that I'm here for in the same way that she is. And I truly believe that. I think for a long time, she just, I thought she was trying to change me. She was trying to just wait, whatever, love me anyway, sin, hate the sin, love the sinner sort of thing. And it's not like that. So if you're curious about how we've done that, we have a podcast called Splintered Grace, where we talk, because we both grew up in the very same small town. She's actually the one who took me to church the first time. And so, and we talk every week, whether it's recorded or not. It's usually not recorded, but all right. So I think that was the bulk. Again, you have the postcards if you want to learn anything more. Again, I think there are so many directions we could go. Always feel like if I could be a resource to you, I'd love it. So just reach out if you have any questions or if there's anything that I can be of assistance with. And thank you all for being here today. And then I think we're going to do a spiritual moment. Is that right? With Michelle.
Oh, Michelle.
Welcome to the stage.
Hello now.
Hey, love. How are you? It's so good to see you.
Good to see you.
Mwah. I've been standing in these too long.
I have some stickers and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Like my merch.
Yeah.
Set that up.
Yeah, you can probably sit out here. Yeah. Do you need a mic for? Is she good?
Thank you for your answer. I really appreciate it, and I don't want you to feel like too much vulnerable.
Oh, no, not at all. No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so
That
much.
stuff needs to be said.
Hey everyone. Hi. So my name is Michelle Pante. I use she, her pronouns. I come from Vancouver, British Columbia, the west coast of Canada, and I'm from the stolen Coast Salish lands, the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people. I want to introduce myself in a good way, which for me is also telling you where my people come from. My mom is Therese Marie Riley. She died 2 years ago from end-stage Alzheimer's disease. And she's from a coastal village on the eastern shores of Ireland. It's called Blackrock. And my dad is Mario Pante. He lives in a care home with advanced Alzheimer's disease. And he is from a mountain village in northern Italy called Lamone. I've chosen to read a blessing from an Irish author, the late John O'Donoghue. It's one of my favorites. It's from his book, Benedictus, A Book of Blessings. And before I do that, I also just want to speak for a moment about my faith journey and to let you know I was raised Catholic. I was baptized at 3 weeks old. I'm Irish Italian. I don't know if you get more Catholic than that. And I left the church in my teens, feeling really as an act of protest for all the obvious reasons in terms of oppression and corruption and lack of accountability. I journeyed for many years as a seeker. I was part of founding something called the Interspiritual Center of Vancouver, which doesn't really exist anymore, but it was about creating a shared house of God, or a shared house for the divine, the holy, where people of different faith traditions could come together to... I hear an echo. Is there an echo? Can I do anything differently? No? Okay.
Makes you sound more holy.
Okay. Ooh. And in the process of being, that's better, in the process of being part of the Interspiritual Center of Vancouver, I returned to my Catholic tradition. There was actually an event we held, and one of the people involved in the board was actually friends with the Dalai Lama. And he came to this event, and he was speaking about, I was sitting maybe where Callie J is, and he was saying to the group, you know, I urge you to not abandon your traditions that you were born into. He said, I think we're born into our traditions for a reason, and that maybe to consider what you can contribute and how you can help shape your tradition. And I was sitting there going, fuck you. I'm a Catholic woman. You're a Buddhist man. You know, it's not the same. And I had such anger and such intense emotion around it. I knew there was something in it for me to look further at. And eventually I did return to my Catholic faith and met my husband in the church. Our daughter went to Catholic school. And then in the last 5 years or so, I actually moved to become a member of the United Church of Canada, where I feel more at home in the liturgy and the nourishment and the joy that is present there. And being Catholic is still part of who I am, because it's where I come from. So I'm going to read this short blessing 3 times. And as I read, I invite you to just take what's there. I feel very full myself after Bonnie's conversation with us. And this blessing is about coming home. To come home to yourself. May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love. To come home to yourself. May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love. To come home to yourself. May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love. In introducing myself, I forgot to say that I am a student at the Vancouver School of Theology, and I'm in a program training to be what here you would call a spiritual care provider. In the West, for whatever reason, we seem to use the language spiritual health. So I'm a spiritual health practitioner in training. So I'm one of the people over the weekend who has offered to provide some space if you'd like someone to listen and just be with you in whatever's going to support you with your emotional and spiritual coping. And if there's anybody else in the room who's also volunteering to do that, could we perhaps put up our hands so that folks can see those are? Okay, that's all right. Yeah, so just a reminder that the beauty and the intensity of what's taking place may create for you an opportunity to just tend to yourself in a way where you want to access some support. Thanks very much. Yeah. Does this look funny?
I want to see the perfect one.
Okay.